Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Inquirer Live, where we're discussing the latest chapter in our series, A More Perfect Union. My name's Errin Haines. I'm the contributing editor for this project, and over the course of this year, we're going to be exploring several of the institutions that were founded in Philadelphia, as well as the inequality that those institutions birthed as a means for a way forward for us as Philadelphians and hopefully as a democracy. I want to personally invite all of you to join us on this journey, and you can read more about the entire series if you go to inquirer.com/moreperfectunion. So today I am thrilled to be joined by my friend, historian and Johns Hopkins professor, Martha S. Jones, who wrote the latest chapter that we're discussing today, Scars and Stripes, which is an essay about the American flag and its many meanings. If you stick with us, we're also going to be joined by Dane Saint, A More Perfect Union's creative director, who conceived of Iconic, which is a side piece that is a look and a reimagining of some of the objects of Americana that really were also created in Philadelphia. And one of the artists that helped us in reimagining that is also joining us. So you will definitely want to stay tuned for that. So with that, let's get started. Welcome, Martha.
Thanks so much, Errin. It's great to see you.
Hi, Martha.
Hi, Errin. Can you hear me now?
I can definitely hear you now. Before we get started, I just want to invite the audience. You can absolutely submit questions for this conversation, especially if you've already read the series or just have questions about the series or this chapter. You can do that by heading over to inquirer.com/live to submit questions, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible during the course of our conversation. But first, I have some questions for Martha. Just to talk a little bit about Scars and Stripes. Congratulations, Martha. This essay I felt like was just exactly what I was looking for as part of this project. And really, I will say as part of conceiving this project and getting ready for this project, I made a stop at a place where you went as part of your reporting for this essay, and that was to the Betsy Ross house. Betsy Ross being, the woman who is so closely associated with the birth of the American flag right here in Philadelphia. And so I guess I want to start by just asking you how you approached this chapter, what you were thinking when you, were setting out to do this essay. What was on your mind?
First of all, let me say thank you to you because for the opportunity to do this and for the encouragement to come in and visit the Betsy Ross house. I think I'm like many Americans. The story, we might say the myth of Betsy Ross was one that I was raised on. And in some sense, the American flag and Betsy Ross, sort of go together, almost inextricable from one another.
Yes.
But it was also true that I had recently seen two things. One, the very unsettling imagery that many of us encountered in the wake of January 6, 2021, the way in which the U.S. flag had been wielded quite literally as a weapon during the insurrection that day at the U.S. Capitol. And at the same time, I'm someone who keeps American flags in my own home, including the flag that was bestowed to my family when my father, who was a Black veteran of the Second World War, was buried. So while the flag is everywhere in some sense, this gave me a chance to really think about the places where I encountered the flag and the many almost conflicting messages, right? The conflicting meanings that the flag has, depending on who's displaying it and how they're displaying it.
Yeah. I mean, I think what was so interesting for me and really why I felt like you were the right person to really tackle this particular subject is because you are somebody who is in Baltimore, right? Home of Francis Scott Key and the Star Spangled Banner, the song about the American flag. And so, for the American flag, it feels like it kind of is something that is the air you breathe in a way too, and in a way that a lot of people similarly encounter the flag in Philadelphia as kind of it's just part of the DNA of the city, right? And so I wonder how that really influenced you in terms of, you started kind of talking about your relationship to the flag, but really how this particular essay was a bridge for you in a way, based on just Baltimore and Philadelphia's relationship, and you kind of being the connective tissue here for the purposes of this essay.
Well, it turns out the flag has more than one origin story. And one of the important origin stories is here in my hometown of Baltimore, where at Fort McHenry in 1814, what came to be dubbed the Stars and Stripes was flying during the Battle of Baltimore during the War of 1812. Francis Scott Key, folks will perhaps remember, penned a poem that's set to popular music. And the flag enters a new chapter in its sort of iconic significance for the United States. And of course, Key's poem becomes the national anthem in 1931, something that almost as ubiquitous as the flag itself, we hear played during all sorts of ceremonial occasions in the United States. So here's something that is part of the ordinary landscape in my city, like in Philadelphia. But I knew in order to understand that flag, I had to go back in time. That's what historians like to do in any case, but to go back in time and to learn the backstory of the flag that I see all the time in Baltimore. And that, of course, as you all know, brings me back to Philadelphia.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, I'm thinking the Star Spangled Banner, our national anthem, and the American flag, I mean, the symbol of the American flag, such a powerful combination for so many Americans. But also, the reality is that combination has different meaning for different people in this country, depending on what your relationship is to the country. Your relationship, to the flag can vary. Talk to me just kind of about what you learned in writing this essay, without giving too much of it away, because I definitely want people to read it. But what you learned about the flag, kind of the power of that symbolism, but also the meaning of that symbolism, depending on who people are.
So one of the things that I learned was that it's not possible to limit or contain or even control, right, the meaning of the flag. That's not our experience as a country. That in nearly every chapter of our history, the flag has been appropriated. It has been transformed. It has been adopted as a symbol, sometimes of what we might broadly call patriotism, but just as often as a symbol of protest. And this means that as much as I think I might have assumed the flag had a simple or a straightforward meaning, that even today, when we encounter the flag, we're not sure if somebody's trying to get us to buy a used car, or they're calling us to come together, right, for some great national concern like a response to a global pandemic. The flag is used in those ways and many others. And that I hoped that from the essay, folks would take away a more expansive and maybe a sharper sense of how to read with nuance the flag when they encounter it in their everyday lives, because it doesn't have just one meaning.
Of course, I'm on mute. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because you brought it up earlier in the conversation, is that you talked about the idea that January 6th really changed what you thought about the flag, your relationship to the flag. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think I was like a lot of folks, tuned in on my social media, on my laptop, watching in real times as events there unfolded. There were lots of banners flying
Yeah.
during that insurrection, but among them was the American flag. And in the days that followed, again and again, I encountered an image of someone using not the flag itself, but the flag pole, right, with the American flag flying on the top end, using the pole itself as a weapon to attack a police officer. Well, there's so much about January 6th that is important to reflect upon, but that moment for me was one again where I thought there's no simple meaning to that flag, that's a deeply disturbing appropriation of the flag and its symbolism. And it is a reminder that sometimes Americans use the flag as a cover for what I view as profoundly anti-democratic, maybe even anti-American um, acts like the insurrection at the Capitol, and that being able to recognize, the false or the twisted use of the flag, I think, is an important um, capacity for us to have. In part because, you know, what I learned also is that we debate using the flag in our many iterations of the flag. It's a way of shorthanding, encapsulating, and sometimes having a debate when it's too tough to have the debate expressly with words. We do the debate symbolically by the way in which we use the US flag.
Yeah, I think you're making such a good point there, because I do think that there are points, as you brought up, in our history where the flag has felt more divisive, and then there are points where it has felt more unifying. And I wonder which one of those moments you think we are more in today.
Oh gosh. I wish I could say I thought we were in one moment or another because, for example, just read the pages of the Philadelphia Inquirer for 2021, which I did in getting ready to write this essay. And you have, on the one hand, in the streets of Philadelphia, folks who are marching um, in support of white supremacy unapologetically, and they are carrying the American flag. And at the same time, you have Black World War II veterans being buried in Philadelphia with military honors, coffins draped with the flag. Those two things exist and unfold side by side in 2021 in a city like Philadelphia, which to me is a reminder that on some days we have to have the courage, right, to ask the question, tell me more about your flag, right? Tell me what it is I need
Yes.
to know about you.
Yes, what you're starting to say here is exactly that leads me exactly into my next question, which is, um, you know, I'm wondering whether you feel like the flag is a symbol that can be used to help to perfect our union in any way. How can we use that as Americans? Should we even be thinking about using that as Americans as a way to perfect our union, as a way um, to remind of other Americans about kind of our commonality?
One of the questions I had going into this essay, which I hope I'm pretty honest about, was whether I thought this was my flag at all. That I was raised in a Black American tradition, right? That looked critically at symbols of American patriotism because sometimes those symbols, like the flags, are signs of exclusion rather than inclusion for Black Americans. So I brought that question with me to this essay. What I discovered in part is that through the work of artists, and I know we're going to talk with some visual artists and creative folks in a bit, through the work of Black American artists, I learned that not only were there powerful questions for us embodied in the flag, but that we have a tradition of claiming that flag, of owning the flag, of envisioning ourselves underneath the flag, despite the strife, despite the doubts, despite how the flag might be appropriated for anti-democratic and even white supremacist purposes, that again and again we have returned to this same symbol to make it our own. I saw the work of artist Emma Amos in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and Amos is using the stars and stripes, but replacing the blue field with historical photographs and images from the African American past as a way of inserting us into the symbolism, the meaning, the history of the flag. And that was, in the end, a powerful correction for me, that rather than standing outside the flag, part of the work is to be active and engaged with it, and to make it what we need it to be, both as a symbol, but also as a reflection of who we are as a country.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, just the idea of the diversity of our country really being reflected in the diversity of meaning of that flag, the flag as a mirror in a lot of ways, for different communities, which is really interesting to think about. Well, I guess, kind of the last thing I would wonder is, now that your essay is out in the world, you've had a chance to kind of sit with the flag, sit with the flag's relationship to our city, Philadelphia, to your city, Baltimore. What do you hope that audiences take away from this essay? What do you hope that people think about when they think about the flag going forward, and really taking in the fuller history that you lay out as a way to think about what our country, what fellow Americans should be thinking about going forward?
Yeah, I think for me, my best aspiration for the essay is that it does become a place from which we can talk about how we use the flag, how we display it, what it means in our everyday lives. I have a neighbor who every summer hangs the flag from her porch across the street from me. I've never asked her what it means to her, what it is that she intends to say to about herself, but to our small neighborhood, to our community. And I think this summer I will have the reason and the courage from writing this essay to ask her about it and to open up a conversation about how we see our country and how we see ourselves in it. We might not agree or see things precisely the same way, but on a good day, what I hope is that the flag is an opening for those really important conversations that we should be having with one another as Americans, even when the flag might mean different things to
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm also hopeful that your essay can help to create that opening for people to have that conversation, that what you have written will give people the tools and the language, maybe to start to talk to their friends, their family, their neighbors about what the flag means to them. So thank you so much for the essay. Thank you so much for talking to me about this
Thank you.
work. And I'm so glad that it was also a gratifying, rewarding, illuminating experience for you too. And I hope it is for
Mhm.
our audience as well. Again, Martha S. Jones, author of the latest chapter of A More Perfect Union, Scars and Stripes is the name of that chapter. And I encourage everyone watching and listening here to give it a read, and please share it with the people in your life. So with that, Martha's going to stick with us, but we are also going to bring in, as I mentioned before, creative director for A More Perfect Union, Dane Saint, is with us. Hi, Dane.
Hi, Erin. How are you doing?
I am great. I am so great. And joining Dane is also going to be Michael Elam, who is a visual artist who was one of the contributors to our project on Americana, some of the icons that we reimagined as part of the More Perfect Union project. So welcome, 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 and thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your contribution. I so appreciate it. So listen, before we get into the icons themselves, Martha, I want to start with you because obviously we're talking about the American flag. There are other icons, and I encourage everybody to take a look at them. We're going to preview them here in a minute on screen, but just the idea of symbols of Americana and the power of those symbols and how those can even kind of seep in to what our idea is of our country's history, of our country's origin story. Why are they so powerful? Why do those symbols work?
They are, I think, a visual shorthand for a very complex history and a very complex set of ideas about
Mhm.
the nation. And so, um, listen, I'm a history professor, and I could speak to you all day about many things, including the history of um, uh, our shared national ideals, our failures to live up to them, and more. But flags are indeed one example of the kinds of icons that we use to capture those complex ideas. And at the same time, what we know is that too often those kinds of symbols pretty easily, pretty quickly get wrapped up in mythology rather than history. And the flag is one example that is oftentimes reduced to a simplistic notion of patriotism, is often ascribed to its meaning ascribed to an originary moment like the American Revolution. Yes, those things are part of the story, but in the end, it turns out it's part of what leads to our confusion, right? Is the ways in which myths um, don't square, right, with our lived experience of a symbol like the flag. And that's where I think a project like this one, really has a value to all of us, because it encourages us to come back to more layered thinking, more nuanced thinking, more historical thinking about these icons, rather than trying to fix them in time or trying to um, squeeze all our ideas into one symbol. It turns out not to work very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, when we conceived of a more perfect union, certainly the American flag was a chapter that we wanted to do. But Dane, because Dane is brilliant, came up with an idea to really expand a conversation around, you know, the symbols that were born here in Philadelphia. And I certainly learned a lot from this particular piece of the project. So I'm wondering if, Dane, I'm going to come to you now because I really want you to talk about where the idea came from to focus on these icons and how we ended up choosing the icons that we chose and then the artists that we chose to execute a reimagining of those icons.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were first talking at 801 Market, going through what we were looking at for a more perfect union, we were concentrating on Philadelphia first. Things that started in Philadelphia that took off and really started applying to the rest of the country. And some of those things we're looking at through the lens of systemic racism, how infrastructure ideas and decisions that were made here progressed throughout the rest of the country and became sort of this bedrock that allowed methods of oppression to continue. But at the same time, we wanted to pay tribute to Philadelphia as a revolutionary city, not just in the Revolutionary War, but going through now. Like the whole design ethos for the project is cobblestones and graffiti. The idea that that history and that newness can coincide and really do. So when we were looking at the list of American firsts, and myself coming from sort of an art background and a tech background in Philly, knowing so many talented, brilliant artists, it just seemed natural to, if we're doing this reimagining, if we're doing this reassessment of our history and Philadelphia's role in American history and American symbology, the most natural and the most Philly thing to do would be to remix the symbols of Americana. And so we spent a long time kind of going through, the list is much longer than 5, but one of the things that really felt iconic and anthemic, things that, when you think about the Liberty Bell, you think about America. When you think about, the Cowboys taming the West in the Stetson hat, you think about America. It's a lot of these things that I grew up with in media. A lot of, when Reagan was running for his election campaign, he had that Stetson hat. And George W. Bush, the same thing, that really drives home this idea that I'm an American.
Yes.
So you can trust me there. And that doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. So I just wanted to create a platform for Philly artists to be a part of that conversation in a real and tangible way. And I'm just blown away with the work that everyone came up with.
Me too. And so, with that, I want to just preview for the folks tuning in here what those icons are. So we're going to bring the icons up on the screen. And Dane, I'm actually going to let you introduce the 5 icons that we settled on, and just say a little bit about the artists that we chose to help execute these amazing, just total reimaginations of what these things represent in our city and in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Liberty Bell is pretty iconically Philly, and it's something that we talk about in the States a lot. And it wasn't even called the Liberty Bell until abolitionists really seized on it as a symbol to end slavery. And it was cast in a time when slavery still existed, and became this symbol of independence. It's hanging outside of Independence Hall. It's a thing that over the years some nativist groups have taken and put alongside, like the Gadsden snake and all of these other symbols as well. And I'm just going to let Mikhail talk about what he saw in this and how this reinterpretation came together.
Okay, so I think the first thought I had about it was, let me go back and sort of do a little bit of research and just see what was going on. Obviously, I studied this, as we all did, in probably grade school and beyond that. But I wanted to reinvestigate it, for one, because in the last couple of years, I've realized, I had this realization that a lot of history has been omitted, and or the way that I learned it as a child is not necessarily the complete story. So I did some research, went back and, read about the abolitionists, what was going on at the time as the Liberty Bell was, getting placed. And what I found really interesting was several things. George Washington did have slaves, even though he stood on the side of freedom for slaves. There was, several others were in the exact same, point of view, as they were sort of saying, yeah, slavery needs to end. At the same time, they actually had slaves. So as I'm investigating that, I see this really, really curious image I found. And it was of an illustration of a slave in a muzzle, wearing a muzzle. And then when I read, it's some of this you can't, it's almost like a nervous laughter that I developed after I read what I read. Sometimes they use these muzzles because slaves could overeat at the end of the day after being worked really hard. So they would put the muzzle on them. And I, not only did I find it like incredibly disgusting, but at the same time, I have to laugh now, because here we are in 2022, and I'm now just seeing, now just discovering this actually. Now I've seen that image of the slave with a muzzle but I actually somehow, being an African American and growing up with the same dreams as everyone else, you kind of you can get lost in your own little world of trying to just be like everyone else, get ahead, have a comfortable life, share it with your loved ones, all of that. And then you have these moments in the news where all of that is just thrown out of the window, because then you realize, oh my gosh, it's no different than it was, 200 years ago in some ways, because some of the actions are in some ways more horrible, because here we are in 2022. Now, I chose to sort of create a pseudo muzzle, and I like using found objects. So what I did was I actually started with painting the face, and then on a stretch piece of canvas. Then I cut out the areas around the face. And then I sort of found this embroidery hoop, which I found very fascinating. And I sort of attached the hoop, and I created this kind of a muzzle effect. But then I thought, here we are also in this time of the pandemic and COVID and stuff, and all of these masks are decorated. So I was like, that's where the Liberty Bell symbol is going to go, right in the center. The rope represents what you might think. It's, typical of being tied up, being hung from a tree, being, many, many things can happen with the rope. And in the second layer that's behind it, which you probably can't see because it actually lights up, there's a map of the world behind it, which sort of represents, the idea that this is where, we arrived here from somewhere else. And I feel we have contributed it to this country's growth and to this, and to the building of this nation. But yet there's a lot of people that still would like to treat us as if we were secondary to all of that, maybe even less than secondary.
That is amazing. Mikkel, this reinterpretation is amazing. I am wondering for you what the process of reclaiming and reimagining the story of the Liberty Bell, what does that do for you as a Black American? What does that do for you as somebody in Philadelphia? You are somebody who, you are encountering the Liberty Bell, and you are not just kind of accepting the origin story of the Liberty Bell as fact, right? Like, you are questioning. You were on a journey that sent you down a path to learn more history and come up with what you have come up with here. So, just talk to me about what the emotional experience and the artistic experience of really reclaiming this symbol.
Well, this is an excellent question. So the writer that I worked with, Zoe Greenberg, yes. She actually, the first question she asked me was, what was my first memory of seeing the Liberty Bell? And I said, honestly, I felt just like everyone else in my class. It was a class trip. I got to learn a little bit about, the history of it. We visited it. And then what happened much later was I happened to work in that part of the city, and I would walk by it every single day. But now I'm more than an adult person, and I now have this realization of all of these other things in the world. So I would walk by it. It's a highly visited place. It's always, I would have to walk down the 3rd and Market, and as you know, it's around 5th and Market. So I would see all the tourists here and people taking selfies in front of it and all of it. Now, the city has acknowledged the slave parts of it in some of the imagery around it. So I'm happy to see that. But it's a funny thing. Would I like to be a part of this country? Yes. I have been. But on the other hand, does the country actually really want me to be a part of this country, is the question, because we're so divided in these many different parts of the states. And as we could see in the last few years, starting with it's this series, the ongoing series of shootings and deaths of unarmed people of color, driving while Black, or some other sort of thing that it can happen, makes you realize. And then when you see the insurrection and like what that stood for, and then when you see things like, I think a few years ago, I realized that the Ku Klux Klan had a permit around every Labor Day, and I don't know if that still exists, but it was in Pennsylvania, sort of near the Ohio border. And they had this permit, and they could, greet. They could get there and go there and have whatever their rallies and cheer each other on. But then, you fast forward and Black Lives Matter, and we're protesting because of all of the inequalities. And then all of a sudden there's tear gas and being, great amounts of water, and they're telling us that we're being violent when we're in actuality being very, very passive. I mean, just being, I should say, passively aggressive, and so I think that it's just a double standard. And at the end of the day, what I wanted to show, I know it's a powerful image in terms of it, that it's, it's almost like might be terrifying to some in a way, but art, the only power I have really is in making a piece of art. And I wanted something that said, yes, this rope does exist. This muzzle did exist. Perhaps it does exist even now somewhere. I'm not so sure it doesn't, and so, last word. I live in the city. I've been lucky that I live in the North. And I grew up in Philadelphia, lived in New York, lived in LA. But I also know that there are certain places in this country that I would not want to be driving through in the middle of the night. And in fact, I even have an experience about that many years ago. I don't have to go into it. But I drove across country from California, and I was even warned, and I did it alone. I was even warned, call every night to just check in where you are. And so what I would do is I drive 10 hours every day, and then find a hotel or something somewhere and stay overnight, and then drive another 10 hours and then do the same thing until I got back to Philadelphia. And so what happened was I ended up in Arkansas, and it was just because it was getting dark and I didn't want to be driving at night. And I pulled into this town, and I saw a convenience market across the street from what was really a motel that I was staying in. I decided to walk across the street to the motel, or to the store, just to get some water and stuff. And there was music in there. When I walked in, the music stopped, and there was this awkward silence, and they were not going to help me. So I actually ended up turning around and leaving. And then I realized as I crossed back across the street, I looked back and they were pointing in my direction. So that happened in the 90s. And then there's been so many more incidents since then. So the fact is that we are in modern times and this is still going on. So,
No, absolutely. Well, listen, I mean, Mikkel, you are powerful because this art is powerful. And it is, questioning notions of who has liberty in this country, and who is allowed to have liberty, and what liberty looks like, depending on your perspective and vantage point as an American, are all very important questions. I will probably be spending a lot more time have your interpretation of this icon. I will be revisiting it, but thank you so much for sharing sharing that and sharing your journey and your relationship to the project with us. We are so glad that you were able to contribute, and so glad, so very just excited with what you have produced. In the time that we have left, Dane, I'm wondering if you can just show our audience a couple more of the icons, just briefly, that we settled on, but also if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that we didn't end up choosing.
Yeah, for sure. So just to go through these, the sousaphone was something that I definitely wanted to touch on, since that was created right here in Philadelphia. And the sound, that big brass sound, it's such a sound we associate with like the office of the president and the army and the armed forces. But at the same time, it's an integral part of second lines in Louisiana and funk and black music. So there's this real dichotomy between the sousaphone being used by systems of power versus by the powerless. And I think that having this anonymously led Black female art collective, Ms. Ikar, really, as they said, taking the sousaphone to the abyss, to sort of paraphrase Rick James. I love what they did with this.
It's beautiful.
Absolutely came in gorgeous. I love the colors. I love the over-the-topness of it. If we want to look at the next one, the Stetson hat, as I mentioned sort of earlier, has this sort of sense of the grandness of the American West, even though that's something that came from Black and Mexican cowhands. It became this symbol of, like, in a lot of ways, the white man taming the wilds, right? And now we look back on that and it's like, oh, we were actually taking land from the indigenous people.
Yeah.
But we still have this idea of the American cowboy that really kicks up. So having a dyed and true Philly hat lady to reinterpret that and take this to show community and to show investment in the land that we are currently on, I thought was a really beautiful way of flipping that sentiment on its head.
Yeah.
The kite and key was interesting because what we're sort of looking at here is the great man of history theory. This idea, it's something that I only kind of recently came into, is this idea that the framing we have for history is that actions are happening because of the actions of great men, individuals that were somehow exceptional in their time are the drivers of history. And that doesn't track with my own experience working with activists, working with artists, working with all of the little people on the ground level that collectively move history forward. And so this reimagining of the kite and key, sort of taking that idea of, Ben Franklin as the sole inventor and turning it into something that is more collective, more diverse, was a really beautiful reimagining of that by Nicole Medina.
Yeah.
And then finally, one of my favorite pieces is this literally reclaimed American flag. Kimberly McGlone runs Grant Boulevard out in West Philly. All of the work that they do is made with sustainable and reclaimed materials. They have training programs to help people who are formerly incarcerated get back on their feet. And it just seemed like perfect way of taking an American symbol that is so deeply ingrained in Philadelphia identity and doing something even more Philly with it, which is turning it into a expression of rebellion and fortitude. And this jacket, I need one of these jackets. I
definitely am coveting this jacket, absolutely. Yeah. But even just the jacket. I mean, literally being photographed, the portrait in Old City, right around the corner from the Betsy Ross house, as a matter of fact. I mean, it really is spectacular. But yes, I'm definitely coveting this jacket. So Kimberly, I will be stalking you. But in the meantime, we are out of time for today's conversation, but this has been really, really remarkable. I'm so excited about this chapter. I'm so excited about the thoughts that it is provoking with folks, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in. I invite you again to read the entire series at inquirer.com/moreperfectunion. We have more chapters to come. Like I said, we will be unpacking these institutions over the course of the next several months. And so we welcome and invite you to join us on that journey. Again, I'm Errin Haines, contributing editor for A More Perfect Union, and I so appreciate you all for joining us for this Inquirer Live. Have a great afternoon and enjoy this beautiful weather.